Welcome back to the Leadership Growth Blueprint podcast. Today's guest is Dr. Daryl Stickel, one of the world's leading authorities on trust in leadership. With a PhD focused on building trust in hostile environments and decades of experience advising executives, governments, and organizations, Daryl is the creator of the Trust Unlimited framework and author of Building Trust, Exceptional Leadership in an Uncertain World. If trust is the currency of modern leadership, Daryl is helping define how it's built, measured, and restored. Everyone, please welcome Daryl Stickel. Daryl, you've spent years studying trust in hostile and high stakes environments. What originally pulled you toward trust as a serious field of study, not just a leadership buzzword?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's kind of the origin story, right? I grew up in a small community in northern Canada, and people tended to pull together. And through a series of mishaps and misadventures, I ended up developing a sense of empathy with folks that was stronger than most. And I found myself going to university, and I'd be sitting on a bus, and complete strangers would sit next to me and say, "I'm really having a hard time." And I wanted to understand why that was happening. So I started working on crisis lines, working with families, troubled teens, people who are struggling to hone those skills, but to also get a clearer understanding. And my intent was to become a clinical psychologist. And partway through that journey, I realized that the people I was working with were doing the best they could. It had taken them years to get where they were. It was going to take them as long to get out of it if they ever did. And I thought it'd drive me insane because even when you could see solutions, they just couldn't implement. And so I started working in government. I got pulled into native land claims in British Columbia, and they had asked me these sort of series of deep philosophical questions like, what is self-government, or what will the province look like 50 years after claims are settled? The last question they asked me is, how do we convince a group of people who shafted for over 100 years they should trust us? And that just seemed like a really good question, right? Because it gets to those long-term disputes, why they're so resilient, why we can't get past them. And so I went to Duke and wrote my doctoral thesis on building trust in hostile environments.
It's so interesting because you said you would sit on the bus and just people would open up to you. I can just tell through Riverside, through the software that we're using, you have a very calming presence about you. And I can see why people would open up to you on the bus just sitting next to you. So yeah, you have that energy to you.
Yeah, I've had students come up to me and start telling me their life story and saying, I don't know why I'm telling you this, but you just feel safe but strong, right? So
Yes.
there's that aura of trust that we can carry with us. It's something that's evolved over time, and it's an acceptance of others and an appreciation of other people and a truly deep-seated desire to help them get better.
Do you feel like the deep acceptance of others and that empathy with others starts with yourself? Like if you have things about yourself that you deeply dislike, I feel like
Mm.
it's kind of hard to sit in that presence with someone and be non-judgmental. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, that's a good point, Jordan. I mean, for me, I went through some traumatic experiences. You know, when I was 17, I was playing junior hockey. I got jumped by a fan with a club, shattered my helmet, knocked me unconscious, just about killed me. Um, I knew I was losing my vision when I was growing up. I have a hereditary retinal disorder. I'm legally blind now. My whole plan had been to think for a living, and now all of a sudden I had the attention span of a fruit fly. You know, I went from being really good at school to failing everything, and it led to some really dark moments, right? My sense of self was shattered. Hope and aspirations were put into question. It was a dark time, and coming through that gave me a level of acceptance and understanding for others that I don't think a lot of us have,
Mm.
and a deep-seated feeling of empathy for others. And, you know, once I finished my PhD, I went to work for McKinsey and Company, big management consulting firm. I'm advising CEOs and large-scale organizations. And then I get in a car accident on the way to a client site, and I end up with post-concussion syndrome. And so again, I'm back to that place. And I come out of it realizing I'm not perfect and accepting that, but also believing that I can help others, that it doesn't make me less than, right? I wander the world with my guide dog, Drake, trying to make it a better place. I need help often. One of the lines I like to use is that jugglers don't start with chainsaws. Learning to be vulnerable, learning to accept that vulnerability in myself, learning to accept that I'm going to need help from other people to thrive, but that together we can create something amazing, allows me to be okay with being flawed.
Mm.
And a lot of times we struggle with not being perfect, with accepting help from others. I worked with a group of CEOs or senior executives, and we were talking about benevolence, which is having someone's best interest at heart, looking out for someone, having their back. And I asked them to tell stories about times when they'd done that for someone else. And we go around the room, and the energy in the room is just buzzing. And everyone's got these huge smiles on their faces. It's just so positive. And I said, this is fantastic. Now, if you can just explain to me why you're so effing selfish. Because even years later, you're having this positive recollection of helping someone else, being there for them, helping them move forward in life, making their lives better. And you never let anyone have that experience with you. You don't have the courage to ask for help or to admit that you're wrong or that you don't know something. And it was a changing point for that team, that senior leadership team, where they were able to look at each other and go, sometimes asking somebody else for help is a gift that I give.
I love how you use the word courage. You don't have the courage to ask for help. You don't have the courage to be vulnerable. I was just speaking with someone about this the other day. I feel as if I immediately lose respect for an individual, nonetheless a leader, where they can't admit that they're wrong, where they
Mm-hmm.
cannot admit that they need help. It's like, you're a human just like me. I know you're not perfect. Stop acting like you are. It's like one of my pet peeves, one might say. I don't know why that is, but yeah.
Yeah, it's one of these things. A lot of times I talk to leaders and I ask them, "Are you the same leader you were 5 years ago?" And they say, "Oh God, no! I've learned and grown and made mistakes." And then I'll say to them, "Are you going to be the same leader 5 years from now?" I sure hope not. I'm going to grow and evolve. Well, that means you need to let go of the things that got you here, the things that you're already really good at, and step into the things that will make you exceptional. And that means you're going to make mistakes. And if you can't admit that, if you can't turn to your team and say, hey, I'm going to be trying new things, trying to grow and develop as a leader, I will stumble. I may fall. My expectation is that you'll be there with me, that you'll dust me off, help me get back to my feet, and I'll learn from that experience with your help, because that's exactly what I'm going to do for you. Because if we can't do that, Jared, it means we're terrified of making a mistake, which means we're terrified of anyone else making a mistake. And that fear is infectious. It's contagious. And so they stop pushing to the limit of their abilities. They stop trying new things, innovating, adapting, evolving. They start to wither. And we can't stand still these days, right? The world's moving too fast.
Absolutely. Daryl, what do you feel like is the biggest misconception leaders have about rebuilding trust once it's broken?
Great question. 99% of the trust research treats people like rational actors. And we often forget about the emotional side. And I've gone to work in organizations where there have been strikes or there have been misunderstandings, and people hold on to those stories. And leaders will say to me, they're still talking about that? That was 5 years ago. Jesus, move on already. But they don't, right? And a lot of times what I find in the research that I've done, it's one of the first to start talking about the role that our emotions play in our decision to trust someone. If we like someone, we're more likely to give them the benefit of the doubt. And we're more likely to trust them, more likely to see the outcomes in a positive way, which makes us like them even more. But if we dislike someone, we've got this negative scale that we weigh them on, a negative lens that we interpret all their actions through. And so a lot of times leaders forget about that emotional component, the fact that we need to reset those emotional states, that we need to acknowledge that people struggled with this and that there are multiple stories that are being told about it. And a lot of times leaders want to just turn the page and say, well, we learned from that, we're going to move on. That can be helpful in the short term, but can weigh on organizations in the long term.
Absolutely. And you often say that trust is not a soft skill, it's a performance multiplier. Can you explain what actually breaks down operationally when trust is low inside an organization?
Yeah. So a lot of times when I work with leaders, I'll ask them who they trust and they'll give me these sort of close, tight personal relationships, spouse, sibling, best friend. But when I flip that question and say, who trusts you? I'll get this long pause. And then inevitably someone will go, well, how do I know, right? How do I know if someone trusts me or not? Well, trust is the willingness to make yourself vulnerable when you can't completely predict how someone else is going to behave. And the reality is, Jordan, we trust people all the time, right? In our heads, we think about it like it's an on-off switch, like we either trust someone or we don't. But the reality is it's a dimmer switch. We trust some people more than others. And if your people trust you, then how can they make themselves vulnerable to you, and do they? So do they tell you what their real development needs are? Do they push back against ideas they don't think are going to work? Do they try things, experiment? Do they go above and beyond? Do they tell you the bad news? Are you the first one to hear it or the last one to hear it? There's research that tells us that leaders' assessments of how much they're trusted are virtually little better than chance. It's 10% better than pure chance. And so the things we start to see go away in low trust environments are people's willingness to share resources. Everyone starts micromanaging. Everyone starts covering their own ass. We see political behavior accelerate. We see high employee turnover, lack of engagement. All of these things start to create less and less efficiency within the organization. And a friend of mine, Tony Simons, did a study where he looked at just integrity, one of the levers I talk about. And he showed that even small improvements in perceived integrity led to significant improvements in productivity and profitability.
Just from integrity.
Just from higher levels of perceived integrity.
Interesting.
And so we know that higher trust levels lead to more effective organizations, higher levels of performance, customer loyalty, customer referrals, and we see teams willing to go above and beyond to help the organization be successful. That's when organizations really thrive. And what a lot of leaders don't seem to really realize is that the more senior you become, the less direct control you have over outcomes. And the more you depend on those you lead to reach all of your goals and objectives. And so those skills that sometimes get dismissed as soft skills are actually the critical differentiator between leaders who are exceptional and those who are average.
Thank you for those insights. Sorry, I took a second to process what you were saying there. Really, really insightful and valuable pieces of information, Daryl. Truly, thank you. In your book, Building Trust, Exceptional Leadership in an Uncertain World, you introduced the Trust Unlimited model.
Right.
Can you give us a framework or a high-level overview of what that model entails or what that looks like?
Yeah. So when I wrote my doctoral thesis, I came to realize that most of the trust research was focused on uncertainty, and particularly around individuals. What could individuals do to promote trustworthiness or perceptions of trustworthiness? And as I said before, the definition is the willingness to be vulnerable when you can't completely predict how someone else is going to behave. But most of the research didn't talk about vulnerability at all. And so it treated trust like a dichotomous variable, like it was either present or absent. And for me, trust is actually uncertainty times vulnerability gives us a level of perceived risk. And this formula allows us to understand why in early relationships we often have high levels of uncertainty. We're only willing to tolerate a small range of vulnerability because we each have a threshold of risk that we're willing to accept. And it differs for different people. Some people are more trusting than others. But you and I each have a threshold of risk that we're willing to tolerate, willing to accept. And so early in our relationship, high uncertainty has to be low vulnerability for us to fit beneath that threshold. As our relationships get deeper, then uncertainty starts to compress. It gets smaller and smaller. The range of vulnerability we can tolerate with each other starts to grow. And in our deepest relationships, we've just got a sliver of uncertainty and a huge range of vulnerability we can tolerate. And so for us to actually build trust, we need to understand, where does uncertainty come from and how do I take steps to reduce it? And so for me, it's that calculation of uncertainty times vulnerability equals risk. Does it go past the threshold? If it does, I don't trust. If it's beneath it, then I do. Leads to a perceived outcome. And, we interpret the world through stories, so that word perceived is very important. You and I could have exactly the same experience and have a very different story about what just happened. And then that feeds back into our next interaction together. And in the middle of all that is our emotional states, whether we like or dislike someone else. And for me, that means that there are 10 levers that we can pull to actually build trust with someone else. 4 of those levers reside within uncertainty. 2 of them are within vulnerability. 2 of them are within perceived outcomes, and 2 of them are within our emotional states. And so, because we've got a limited time, and I sometimes spend days, I wrote a book about it and spend days talking about it with people, we'll narrow in on uncertainty and those 4 levers. And so 3 of the levers come from us as individuals, things that I can do that would make you more willing to trust me. And those are benevolence. So do I have your best interest at heart? Do I act in a way that puts you first? Integrity. Do I follow through on my commitments? And do my actions line up with the values that I express? And ability. Do I have the competence to do what I say I'm going to do? And then the last lever is context. What are the rules of the game that constrain our behavior? Make it easier to predict how I'm going to behave. Now, we all have the ability to build trust, and we all have the ability to get better at it. So those who aren't great at building trust have a lever that they pull. They pull the ability lever. I have a PhD from Duke, and I've spoken at Harvard and been nominated as one of the world's thought leaders on trust. And I've got a long list of case studies and achievements that have shown that I actually help people make things better, help them be successful. And so that's the ability lever. But if you'll remember when we first spoke, I asked you what good would look like, what would make me one of the best guests you've ever had. And I do that same thing every time I give a lecture. I'll say to people, what would make this one of the best lectures you've ever seen? What would make this one of the best courses you've ever experienced? Because I don't get to define ability on my own.
Hmm.
I need to include you in that definition for me to pull that lever properly. And it's the same with integrity and benevolence. So if I'm pulling the ability lever and the gap that we're experiencing is around benevolence or integrity, I miss. Or if I think I'm pulling the ability lever and it's not working for you, I miss. And so those who are a bit better at building trust have multiple levers that they can pull. Those who are really good have multiple levers and they know when to pull which one. So what I do is I systematically walk people through the different levers and show them how to pull them and then get them to practice. And through training and individual coaching, we give them the skills to reach the goals that they have set for themselves by creating deeper, stronger relationships with others. Does that make sense?
Yeah, yeah, it does. I guess I'm just fascinated at the fact that you really broke it down into a science. I mean, yes, you do have your PhD in building trust, but the way you articulate it, it's simplified, you know?
Yeah. And
Even
that's
though it's
hard
not
work.
built, but exactly, building trust is not simplified. It is not a simple subject at all. But the way you articulate it, it resonates with me. So just thank you, you know?
Yeah. So when I talk people through it, my coaching clients or my students, they go, this feels like common sense. It's like, how did you get a PhD, man? And when I talk to people who are leaders in the field of trust research, they go, my God, you are decades ahead of us. And, because most of the trust literature doesn't include context. Most of it doesn't include vulnerability. Virtually none of it includes emotional reactions or states. And so when you're able to use this model and you start to be able to see, oh yeah, there are things that I can actually practically do. It makes a difference. And I love seeing that for my clients. I mean, one of the places where I've had a probably outsized success is helping people apply for jobs because hiring is a trust decision.
Mm.
And so normally when we go in for an interview, we pull the ability lever, right? We show them our resume. We talk about our experience and all those kinds of things. But what I coach people to do is actually pull some of the other levers. If I was applying for a job with you, I would start asking you, what does good look like from your perspective? What are some of the struggles the team's having? How do I help? What would make me a valuable member of this team? What is success for you? How do I help you get there and now all of a sudden we're having a conversation about ways that I can be a good teammate. And I'm showing benevolence, not just ability.
It's very interesting. I come from a sales background that it's almost as like you're asking proper questions to, your ideal customer. Like, what type of service would you like? What kind of problem are you attempting to solve? But obviously a different spectrum here, but you're kind of being of service. And when you, I guess, have that hat on, like, how can I best serve you? It kind of shows, your integrity levels. You could probably elaborate more on it, but that's just the way that I'm perceiving this right now.
Yeah. And, I worked with a mutual fund company that was trying to differentiate itself. And I said to them, the only thing you can do to make yourself different from other financial services companies is to actually build deep relationships with your customers. And I trained their entire sales force and I trained the guys who were building the funds and I trained the senior management. And after 18 months, they hired a professional survey firm, found out that trust was the primary driver of the sales decision and that they were dramatically more trusted than their competitors, which they hadn't been before the training. And they generated 70 cents of every new dollar that came into the industry for the next 2 years in Canada. They were part of a global fund, and that entity started sending teams from all over the world to figure out what they were doing because they were dominant. And they would, we would talk about how they sold, how could they sell more product? And I said, your mistake is you're trying to go from 10% of their book to 11% of their book. What you should be trying to do instead is double their book because 10% of twice as much is twice as much. And your mindset should be around helping them thrive and be overwhelmingly successful. And that might mean that you go into them and you say, look, here's a set of products that are good for this set of clients of yours. And we've got a good offering, but this other offering's probably better. And being open and honest with them, putting them first. And they said, how do we ask for the business? I said, you won't have to. They'll want to do business with you. You'll be their advisor. You'll be their trusted advisor. You'll be the one that they turn to for help and support. They'll want to reward you. And if they don't, or they can't, you've got other clients that you can help create massive wins for. And so taking your existing clients and doubling their income, that's the way you're going to be successful.
Yeah, trust is massive in sales. I feel like that is the one thing that, like, almost all objections at the end come down to that one thing, is uncertainty, right? If they firmly believed in what you were doing from a product or service standpoint and had zero uncertainty, they would just move forward with whatever decision is next, right? Daryl, I know you want to leave us with some closing notes, some action steps on building trust. I'm gonna let you have the floor, my friend. What are some action steps I can do as someone who is looking to build trust with people in my workforce or my colleagues, customers, potentially?
So here's the conversation I'm going to give for you and the audience, because we talked about this. We want to leave them with something that they can try tomorrow in whatever relationship they want to apply it, whether it's with family, those they lead, colleagues, friends, whoever it is. And the conversation goes like this. I heard this guy, Daryl, he was talking about trust. He was on Jared's podcast, which is awesome, by the way. And he said that benevolence is something that really matters. And really, that's some fancy word to say having people's back. I think I do that, but it doesn't always seem to land that way. Have you ever experienced that?
Mm.
And the other person's going to say yes, because they virtually always do. And then you get curious about that. What happened? What was the miscommunication? What did they think you were trying to do as opposed to what you were actually trying to do? And then we're going to narrow the funnel a little bit. And your next question is going to be, have you ever experienced someone really having your back? What did they do? What did it look like? How did it feel? Now we're priming them and we're getting hints for about ways that we can be benevolent to them. Then you're going to narrow the funnel further. You're going to say, what is success for you? How do I help you get there? What would it look like if I had your back? Now you've created an opportunity for transparency. And they may not trust you enough initially to tell you what real success looks like for them. But the important thing is to get them to offer up something and then look for ways to be transparent about trying to help them achieve what they said was their goal. An example I'll give is one of my students when I was in Luxembourg. We're sitting around the table. I'm talking with the different students. And I said to him, tell me a relationship that really matters to you. He said, my girlfriend. I said, great. So tonight when you go home, you're going to say to her, I was having a conversation with my prof. He was talking about trust. And he said, asked me what relationship really mattered to you. And I said, you. So that's step one. You're telling her that the relationship's important and it matters. Said, then he asked me what mattered most to you. And when I asked him that question, he said, her family. And I said, so you're going to say, I said your family, but is that right? I said, you're giving her the opportunity to disagree with you or agree with you, but you're including her now in the conversation in a way to define what matters to her. And I said, when she says, yeah, my family's really important to me, you're going to follow with the following statement. You're going to say, I'm going to start spending more time with your family because I assume that it matters to you that I get along with them. I'm going to have lunches with them. I'm going to include them in conversations. I'm going to look for ways to be closer with them because it matters to you. And that's a way for you to signal benevolence and be intentional. He came back the next day. He had the biggest grin on his face. He said, I'm allowed to talk to you whenever I want. And he said that went incredibly well. And so that's something your listeners can try in whatever relationship they want to practice on. And it's one of the steps to us trying to seek out ways to show benevolence to someone else to build a deeper connection.
On that note, I know that you have several levers that we can pull.
Yeah.
Which one do you feel like is the most powerful lever to pull? Is it the one that you just mentioned?
I think for leaders, it's got to be benevolence. Yeah, because ability is a moving target. And what made a great leader 10 years ago is probably not the same thing that makes a great leader today. And it's the one we like to pull the most often. Integrity is getting harder because the world's moving so fast and values are changing and norms are changing. It's hard to make long-term commitments because of the pace that the world is moving at. we can still have values that we stick to. We can still make commitments. And I think it's important to be consistent in our behavior and to show our values. But one of the things that seems most resilient is I'll look out for you. I'll do my best to consider your best interests and keep that in mind. And it doesn't have to be always being nice, right? If I'm a leader and someone comes to me and says, I want to get a promotion, then my way of showing benevolence is to say, well, for me to promote you, you're going to have to perform at a higher level, and I'm going to have to hold you to a higher standard. And you're going to have to demonstrate to me and the rest of the organization that you're ready for that role. So that means more responsibility. I'm going to spotlight you more often so that you help me make the case for you to actually get promoted.
Mhm.
And I can't promise you a promotion, but I can promise you that I'll take the following steps to help you deserve it and earn it and show people that you're ready. And that takes you from being a hard ass to being in their corner. Same
No,
behaviors, different interpretation.
that's amazing, actually. Daryl, I really do wish we had more time, my friend. You are clearly the expert on building trust. Where can they find you? Where can they learn more information about your method?
Yeah. So trustunlimited.com is the website, and you'll find links there to my podcast, The Imperfect Cafe. Also, a link to the book, Building Trust, Exceptional Leadership in an Uncertain World, which I've been told doesn't suck. It's written in a way that normal people can read it and understand it, and it's got case studies and stories in it. And I try to show people the model and how to pull the levers. They can reach out to me on LinkedIn, follow us on Instagram or LinkedIn, Trust Unlimited. And they can also reach out to me if they want to have a conversation. I do executive coaching and training and development. It's Daryl at trustunlimited.com.
Awesome. Again, Daryl, it was an honor having you on the show. Audience,
Thanks.
thanks for tuning in. We'll talk to you guys soon.